There we go. And we'll get my computer set up, or my laptop set up here for you so you can see what's going on. Put the magnifier in. So the fly we're tying today is called an Eevil Weevil. The pattern was developed by a tyer out of Calgary, who's a young fellow by the name of Jeremy Davis. And the insect that it is intended to represent is a Mayfly nymph. It was a development from the original Prince nymph, which I think we tied Prince nymphs before, which has a dubbed abdomen and thorax with goose biots for the tail and goose biots at the back on the top. This one is a little different in that it has a different tail. It uses a shell back, a flashback to give it some shine. And it only uses the one set of goose biots. And then it uses a specific type of dubbing. Now you can substitute the dubbing if you want. I don't think it makes a hell of a lot of difference. But as we go through and I tie it, we'll tell you more about the dubbing materials and stuff that you can use. Now with Mayfly nymphs, there's three kinds that are of interest. And of the three, there's only two that are really of interest to the fishermen. There's the burrowers, which are small, fat ones, and they live in the sediments at the bottom of the stream and the lake. And they're not normally accessible to the fish. So they typically aren't used as a fly fishing lure. They tend to be short and fat and quite dark in color. The next are the crawlers, and those are the ones that crawl around on the bottom of the lake or the stream. And they're a little bit longer and skinnier, and they tend to cling along to the rocks and stuff in the lakes and streams. You'll very often find them when they do what's called behavioral drift, which means they will move in the river to spread their population out. They'll let go of the rocks and they'll drift down the stream. So that makes those are particularly interesting for a fisherman who's fishing with an indicator, because you can tie them with a slightly longer body, still reasonably fat in the thorax, and they will fish well under an indicator where they bounce along the bottom and float downstream. And then there's the swimmers, which are for still waters and for pools and stuff. They actually are long and skinny, and they will swim. And those you can fish on a line and strip them. So you want to think a little bit about where you're fishing, what kind of water it is, and whether you want to tie patterns that are for crawlers or for swimmers. Now this is typically a crawler pattern. It's not as long and skinny as a swimmer pattern, and it's a little bulkier. And it's got a bead head, which allows you to fish it under an indicator and still get it down to the bottom fairly well. A lot of the swimmer nymphs don't have a bead head because you don't want them bouncing along the bottom. You want them moving through the water column. So I hope that sort of leads to what you wanted to talk about in terms of what they are and where you might fish them. So this guy's typically one that you would fish under an indicator in a lake or in a stream. And typically you'd want to get it fairly close to the bottom, because that's where these son of a guns live. The hook. Now I've got two kinds of hooks here. This is a Mustad Standard R72, which is a down eye hook. Basically, it's a long body nymph hook. It's like 2x long. The other one that I've been using is this guy here, which is, I'm going to tie this one on. It's a Hannock. Again, it's a still water and wet, but this is the long shank version. Now, if you're going to be tying swimmers, you probably want to go with like a Mustad 9672, which has got like a 3x long. That's in here. That they are 3x long. but this is a crawler, so we'll do with a standard 1.5 to 2x long hook. The bead that I'm using for this particular size of hook, and the one I'm going to tie for you guys is the size 10. And the size 10 needs a fairly robust bead. And so what I picked up was a 1/8 inch tungsten, plummeting tungsten bead. And this one's a little, it's not really gold, it's a little darker than that. And I like the ones with the darker bead. They're not as prominent. Pardon me. You can use standard beads. And I've got a whole box full of standard beads, but you want one for this size 10 hook, you want a size 1/8 inch. When you go to a size 12, the bead's a little smaller. 12s and 14s, the bead's a little smaller. And I'll show you a couple of those ones later that I won't tie. The tail on this guy is pretty straightforward. It's pheasant tail, fibers from pheasant tail. The rib is a fine gold wire. This is a little stiff, so I'm ending up with a very fine gold wire. You could probably get a little thicker than this one. This is an extra fine. And that all that does is that gives the segmentation to the abdomen on the fly that mimics the natural segmentation in the nymph. The shellback is originally, the original version was to use stuff called saltwater flashabou. And the saltwater flashabou, I couldn't find at Robinson's. The flashabou that they have is quite skinny. And this stuff you can see has quite a bit of width to it. So that's the original saltwater flashabou. And Robinson's didn't have that. So I looked around for a thicker flashabou. And I found this stuff, which is called Lateral Scale. And it was expensive, $8.49 for a whole package. But what I like about this one is that it's hard to see in this light, but it's not smooth. It's got little crinkles in it. And I really like the crinkle of it because it adds a little bit of flash that the saltwater flashabou doesn't have. So it makes it nice and attractive. Then the abdomen. Now the original pattern called for this stuff, which is Arizona synthetic peacock, golden color, which is a fairly light color, and that's what I'm going to use for this version. And then it takes the golden one, and then it takes the natural one, which this one Robinson's doesn't have, so you'd have to find something that's similar to this. It's a fairly fine dubbing with a little bit of flash in it, and this is kind of an olive color. But they did have the darker one at Robinson's, which is this natural dark peacock. So I'll tie that with using these dubbings. I have another set of dubbing that if you don't have those, the other stuff I use is it's called Diamond Dub. It's from Canadian Dubbing Company. And there's two colors of peacock. There's a regular peacock and a black peacock. Now you could probably use something like Ice Dub. It would be a similar product. And what you want to find is one that's kind of similar. It's an olive-y type dubbing for the thorax, the abdomen, and then a darker dubbing for the thorax. So the idea is have the thorax about 2 shades darker than what the abdomen is. And then the last thing that you want is some of these guys, which are goose biots, and those give the little wings on the back. Now, one of the things that we've talked before is there were Rick and me and a couple other guys did some testing on the Red Deer River to find out with pheasant tail nymphs, and which pheasant tail nymphs as well they're also a mayfly nymph. If we can improve the catchability by putting a red tag on them. And I think the consensus was, with a little bit of practice fishing, that the red tag improved the catch rate by about 15 to 20%. So I tie both my pheasant tails and my my Eevil Weevils and Prince Nymphs with a little red tag at the back. So we'll start with that, and I'm going to start with the red thread just over the point of the hook. And I'm going to get it started down there. And I'm going to just wrap right to the bend. And then I'm going to wrap in touching turns all the way around the bend until I'm sort of halfway down the back. So this is a tag, and it's just going to show this little bit of red at the back. And again, touching turns back up to give this tag. And then I get back up to where the barb was. I'm going to stop and let that hang for a minute. Now the thread for the rest of the fly is going to be olive. It's 8/0. I'm going to again start right behind the bead, and I'm going to put several wraps in behind the bead, and then I'm going to wrap down the shank of the hook, and I'm going to go all the way down to where the red thread is hanging here. And then I'm going to pull the red thread up and wrap over it 2 or 3 times. And then wrap in front. And just to tie that red thread off. Now, trim it. And that's
Dave,
it.
it's Dave here. You seem blurry today. Is it anybody else having that problem, or is it just me?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's actually slightly out of focus. It's focused more on Dave's body.
Okay.
Okay, so let me see if I can do something here to help that.
Yeah, no, I went in and came back out a couple times thinking it was me.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's see if I can get it closer and see if that helps.
Dave, would it be helpful at this point to just put a tiny little bit of glue there? Or would that screw things up?
Of which?
A little bit of glue? Where
No,
you
I don't need
did
to
the wrap
glue.
there?
No, I don't need to glue.
So your tag is just the red thread, eh?
Yeah,
Like
just the red thread. Yeah. Now what I'm going
I
to do
use it
here
on
is,
salmon flies quite a bit.
yeah. So now what I'm going to do is right where the barb on the hook used to be, I'm going to build a little bump with my green tying thread. And the purpose of this little bump is to cause the tail, when I tie it on, to flare a bit. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take off of this peak pheasant tail. I'm going to take about 5 or 6 strands of pheasant tail and hold them out right at right angles to the stem. And then I'm just going to pull them off. By holding them out at right angles, that's going to line the tips up. I'm going to measure the tail to be, and use my right hand, I'm going to pinch in between thumb and forefinger and adjust it until the tails go the full length of the shank of the hook. But when I pick it up with my left hand to tie it in, I'm going to pick it up with my thumb and forefinger, my left hand, right behind the bead. And that shortens the tail up a bit. I'm going to make a nice soft loop over top of that. And then I'm going to wrap back until it forces that pheasant tail up against that little bump. And as soon as I do that, you'll see how the tail splays out. And then I'm going to just gently wrap over top of that, the butt ends of that, right up to the bead. And I'm going to trim that off. Now I need some of this fine wire. Take it off this spool, which is always a bit of a pain. One of the things I found with the stiffer wire is that if you happen to let it go, sometimes it'll unwind half the spool on you. You can probably barely see that. It's very fine wire. And I'm right behind the bead, so I'm gonna want to spin my bobbin a little bit because the loop tends to fall the wrong way. And I'm gonna tie that wire on right behind the bead, and I'm gonna wrap down the hook shank, keeping that wire on the near side of the hook, on the side of the hook, right back to where I tied the tail in. There we go. Let's stick out the back there. And then I'm going to take this lateral scale or flashaboo, and I'm going to just cut a little nick in it so that it's tapered. Bring my thread up to just in front of the point, and I'm going to catch that onto the hook shank right where the nick is. And I'm going to hold this straight up and wrap it so that it's wrapped right on top of the hook shank. Nice and snug all the way down to where my wire and tail are tied in. That's the shellback or the flashback. I take my dubbing, and for those who aren't familiar with dubbing or have issues with dubbing, I'm going to take a little piece of clump of dubbing in my left hand, hold them thumb and forefinger, and I'm going to pick a little chunk out, and you can see how little that is. It's very small. And I'm going to twist it on the thread, wet my fingers a little bit, and I'm going to try and spread it out enough that I don't get a big chunk of dubbing on there. And you can see that I've used so little dubbing that it maybe makes the thread 3 times the thread diameter, not much more. I want to keep this fairly tight. And then I'm just going to stretch my thread out a bit, and I'm going to continue to take little bits of dubbing. Now this stuff has a little bit of shine to it, and I'd say the fibers are between 1/8 and 1/4 inch long, which any longer than that and they get a little tougher to spin around the thread. The other stuff is a little easier to work with than this Arizona stuff for some reason. And I'm going to keep putting little bits on so that I get a nice even dubbing rope. So where I've got places where it looks a little narrow, I'm going to put a little extra on, and where it's a little fat, I'm going to try and stretch it out. So I take my time doing this, and then it makes it a lot easier to put the wraps on in the right place. So what you want to do here is when you start wrapping the dubbing rope, again, a little bit of spit kind of helps keep this stuff on there. I'm going to start wrapping right back where that flash starts. And I'm going to wrap touching turns of the dubbing all the way up the fly, and try and make sure that that rope stays about the same diameter. And keep the body a nice, if possible, consistent diameter right up the shank of the hook. And I'm going to wrap this up until I've got less than a bead width between the back of the bead and where the dubbing is wound onto the hook shank. When I'm done there, I'm going to finish off. So I want this abdomen to be a good chunk of the shank of the hook. Probably 2/3 of the shank. Because these things, this again is a crawler, so it's going to have a reasonably long abdomen. Once I get that done, I'm going to pull this flash over top of the bead. And I'm going to put a couple of wraps down right in front of where the dubbing ends and make sure it's on top. Then I'm going to pull back and a couple of wraps in front to cinch it off, and then one wrap in behind. And I'm not going to cut that off because that's going to be wrapped around the thorax as well. Take my hackle pliers, and I'm going to make about 4 wraps over top of the dubbing and the shell back up the body of the fly. Now, if you used a little heavier wire, the wraps, these would be a little more prominent. Now, when I get in front of the dubbing, I'm just going to do an extra couple of wraps to cinch that wire in. And wrap twice over top behind it, and then twice in front. And this is a pretty soft wire, so I can pull up on it and I can do this helicopter thing and it breaks right off. And I'm going to pull the flash back towards the back again and wrap over it right to where the dubbing starts. That's going to leave me a gap that's about the width of the bead between the back of the bead and where the abdomen is. I'm going to take this darker colored dubbing, and again, I'll hold it in my left hand and pull little bits of it off with my right and wrap that around the thread. Again, always spinning clockwise, not back and forth, just spinning clockwise. That keeps it bound on the thread. And again, trying to make a nice smooth dubbing rope. And this can be a little thicker dubbing rope because again, you're going to have an abdomen that's thicker, thorax that's thicker than the abdomen. So the dubbing rope can be a little thicker. And also it can be a little spikier. You don't have to compact it as hard. When I get that done, I'm going to wrap right in here. I'm going to make sure it's really solidly wrapped and compacted, particularly right behind the bead.
Dave, sorry to interrupt, but
Yep.
if you could maybe move your camera slightly closer to the ply, it might help with the blurring.
It might. Let's try that. And then the other thing I can do is maybe I'll try putting the magnifier in there. Does that help at all? Does that help?
Yeah, still just slightly blurry, but it's
Yeah, I don't know why. Let me see if I turn. Didn't help.
that's
Is
worse.
that better? Is that better?
No, that's worse.
That's worse. Okay. All right. Yeah, one of these days I'm going to have to, if I can get to the point where I'm using my other computer. I wonder if it's maybe that camera lens just needs a little cleaning. Is that any better?
Yes,
Yes, it
So
is.
I probably have
yes,
a little,
Dave, I can see.
probably have a little gunge on the camera lens. Okay, so now I need a little more of this dubbing because you can see what I want is the thorax to be about 50% larger in diameter than the abdomen. So there we go. So it's nice and bulky. And then the next trick is to get these biots on. And as I did with the Prince Nymph, there's a little bit of a trick to how you put these things on so that they look good. Now with this one, it's a little more important because when I pull the flash forward over between, I want them between the biots. And that did not work. Let's get another bite. I managed to get two at once and they wouldn't separate.
Dave, just show me the feather, would you?
That's the biot. It's off the leading edge of a goose quill. And this is what we're going to use, is this little bit here. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to rotate the device a little bit so that it's tilted towards me. And I'm going to lay with my right hand, I'm going to lay this biot so that the tip of the biot is back at the bend of the hook. And it's slightly on the far side of where the flash is. I'm going to hold it down with my finger of my right hand and do a single wrap over top. And that holds it in place. And if it's too long, I can adjust it a little bit, or too short, I can adjust it a little bit. And before I put any more wraps, I'm going to put the other biot on the near side. So I'm going to rotate this vise a little bit away from me. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lay it on top with my left hand. And I try to even up the tips. Put my finger on top and then wrap one. Have a look at it. Looks pretty good. Even up. And then I'm going to wrap again. So now I got 2 or 3 wraps on there. I'm going to pull the butt ends of those biots up and back. And I'm going to wrap in front of them. A couple of wraps. And I can get in here with my scissors as down as close as I can get and trim the butts off. It's going to leave a couple of little stubs there. I'm going to use my fingernail to push them back. And when I do that, it'll also splay them out a little bit. That tends to splay the biots out. I'm going to take the flash back over top and tie it down right behind the bead. And you'll see the flashback is actually, oops, in between, this up here. The flashback is in between the biots, and I tie it off right behind the bead. Get it good and cinched. A couple of good wraps behind. A couple of wraps in front. And then I'm going to get in here with my scissors and trim that off nice and short. And then to finish it off, I'm going to take just a teeny bit more dubbing and put it just enough to get maybe one good wrap around the fly behind the bead. And I'm going to wrap over top. 1, 2, there we go. And what that does is that buries those little bits of ends of the biot. And then I'm going to finish that with a whip finish right behind the bead. Use my thumb and forefinger to push back, make sure that it's snug in there before I wrap the next one. That's the whip finish. Then I'll come in out here and just trim that off. And he is done. So you see we got these nice little biots that splay out. We have a relatively skinny abdomen that makes up the bulk of the length of the fly and a short, fat thorax. And you'll see that the dubbing is fairly spiky, but if you want to make it even more, you can get in under here and just give it a little bit of a hook with that Velcro stuff. And it'll be pretty spiky, kind of like it has legs. Excess trimmed over there.
Dave, would
That's it.
a separate camera for your computer work better for clarity?
Yeah, except it's an iPad.
Oh, that's what's going on. Yeah, okay.
It's my iPad. So I think what happened earlier was that my camera lens was not clean.
Oh, okay.
So I'll just scrub it up. And the lighting in here is not particularly good today. And also these smaller flies they need a little more detail. So that's that one. I'm just going to very quickly show you. That's the size 10. This is a size 12. It's a little smaller. And this one uses the diamond dub, and you'll see it's quite a bit different in color. It's a little darker. And then I've got some, that's 10s, 12s. And in here, you'll see down here, I've got some size 14s as well. So these guys down here are size 14s. I have them in both the light and the dark color. So that's that.
Looks good.
So now we can go back and Florin is on.
Thank you, Dave.
No problem.
Yes, thanks, Dave.
So that's, I've found this to be a very, very effective fly. I have caught probably a couple of hundred grayling and whitefish on those. And that they're good for trout as well. So I'm thinking the cowichan, this would be a really good fly for the cowichan. And you might even try it in a place like Durant's under an indicator. If there's any mayflies around.
So when you're talking about under an indicator, you're talking about stationary, like anchored, like you would chromonod?
Yep, yep. Just like a chronomid. Maybe a slow strip. Not completely, as they call it, this you do with the leech, a catatonic leech where nothing happens. There you go.
Pretty fly.
Yeah, it did. There you go. So Florin, I think you're muted.
I'm not muted now anymore, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're good. I can hear you.
This looks like a very tempting thing, $35 for photo processing software. Yeah, I'm tempted.
I'm very active in a camera club, and a number of the very sophisticated photographers are using this and liking it.
And
It
is
looks
it
like
a,
a very reasonable,
is it a subscription, Sandy?
No, it's not a subscription.
no,
It looks like it's got a version for the iPad.
it's got a version for everything, and they make it available for a full range of Mac operating systems, which is usually the painful bit. Yeah, so that's good. Anyway, this is what I'm going to tie, and as you can see, I'm sticking to the same theme. It's pretty much very similar to what I was doing last time. So this is the Peter Ross, which is a British fly for sea trout. And I'm tying this in the hope that it should be something that would work for sea run cutthroat in BC as well. Looking through books with pictures of flies and so on, I've seen some of the fry patterns, like the tinsel, for example, has a body exactly like this, no tail, and just a wing on top. And then there are those various other fry patterns that add a little bit of orange dubbing there for remnants of an egg yolk sac. So again, you remove things from this fly and you end up with a lot of things that I've seen listed as good good flies for BC. So if nothing else, this is a good fly to practice a variety of techniques on. Okay. Materials are familiar from past things. The only new thing I'm bringing in today. So tail is golden pheasant tippet. The body is silver mylar ribbed with silver wire. The thorax is red seal fur. The hackle is just some strung black hackle that I have. Hand hackle would work. Anything that's not too stiff and is black will do. And then teal flank for the wing. Okay, and you can try to tie this as a fancy fly. You can go and look up pictures on the internet of those. I don't have anything tied that neatly. Or you can tie fishing flies, which is what this one is. And that's a lot easier. Okay, I have, as usual, I have prepared hooks ready to go. And this one is another size 10 Togan saltwater hook. And the thread is 8/0 uni thread on now my new and exciting bobbin that I'm learning to use. I'll do an underbody for the fly as usual. And when you reach about where the barb of the hook used to be, stop. And actually don't build a thread bump. So you do the opposite of what Dave was explaining on his pattern, because here you don't want that that tail to be splayed. And now is the time where I would be putting on the tail, and I'm looking for my tail feathers. Okay, there they are. So I have a little remnant here from a pheasant tippet, and that's good enough. And what I'm going to do is, as usual, I'm going to grab this in my other hand, and I'm just going to cut the fibers. That's good enough. Measure to be on the safe side, about the length of the threaded body. Transfer and tie with a few wraps. Oops, I let go a little too soon. I need to go back and secure with a couple more wraps. Okay, good enough. So what my concern here is to maintain a reasonably smooth underbody. I'll fix that tail in a moment. Okay, the next thing that goes on is a little bit of wire for the ribbing. And I start the ribbing at, I start the wire. So I attach the wire at closer to the head. I always leave some room here for hackle and wing. So I go about an eye's width back from the head of the fly, and I wrap backwards, keeping the wire to my side of the hook. Right, so the opposite side of what you can see. Okay, let me see if I can still fix this a little bit here. Just a couple more wraps should do the trick. Okay, well, this is gonna be a bad hair type of fly. We'll leave it like that. Then tinsel goes on, and this is Mylar size 12, which is about as wide as you want on a size 10 hook. You don't want any wider than this. I think I can see what the problem is. I'll fix that at the end. Okay, one side is gold, one side is silver. I want the silver on the fly, so I'm going to tie this on with gold side up. I just hold it at a 45-degree angle, and about the length of the body of the fly, I secure with the thread and then just go forward, wrapping over the tinsel. I don't want to do a ton of wraps here because this is going to I'll be wrapping the tinsel over itself, so that's going to smooth things out very nicely. So there's no need to overdo it here with the thread. Just keep wrapping nice and tight, overlapping turns, so you get a nice smooth body. And when you get to the point where you left the thread hanging, a couple of turns of thread on top of the tinsel is all that's needed. Trim, and then just tidy this up with a few more turns of thread. Okay, it's tempting to go and do the ribbing now, but first the dubbing. So this is the point where you risk forgetting doing that. I just take a tiny little bit of seal fur dubbing. So here I have red seal fur dubbing, and on the packet it says red. Let me see here. Where's the this one lost the. They all say red on the packet like this, and then there are about 5 or 6 different shades. So the colors are very inconsistent. You either buy a huge pile until you find the shade you want, and keep the others for other situations, or make sure you don't buy mail order. You try to buy this off the shelf so you can actually see the color you're going to get. So the dyeing tends to be, I found with seal fur, the colors overall, I don't know, these are all boutique operations doing the seal fur dubbing, it seems. And everybody has their own idea of what red is, what olive is. So when I wrap this, what I typically do, so let me unwind here. What I typically do, I'm a little bit too far in the front, and I'm just going a few wraps back to build a thorax, and then I double back over it towards the front. So now I've got my thorax, and I'm ready for the ribbing. So take the silver wire. This is going to reinforce and give extra flash to the fly. So here are 2 or 3 turns of thread. You got to be careful if you're using 8/0, you're not pulling too hard, and then helicopter the wire carefully so you don't break the thread. Okay. Once that's done and out of the way, the next thing to put on is hackle. And this is what I have. So it's low grade. It's low grade Rooster Hackle by the looks of it. Hen would do as well. It's got long enough fibers that they reach back pretty close to the point of the hook, so you get that sort of nice wet fly kind of look. Both sides of this feather look very shiny to me, so I'm going to try to guess which one is the shiny side, which I want up. And the reason I want the shiny side up is because I want, in the end, to pull these fibers to the back. Okay. So then wrap the hackle. A couple of turns is more than enough. Just one in front of the other. And don't worry about the fact that they're perpendicular to the hook shank for now. That's okay. Just secure the stem. And trim. Okay, now I want to push these fibers back. To get them nicely out of the way and make room for the wing. So what I'm trying at this step is to get the fibers both back and a little bit down. I'm not going to get all the fibers completely down below the hook like a beard. There'll still be some sticking up. I'm just going to leave them in place. Okay, so hopefully there is not too much. The seal fur usually gives you a few extra fibers that you need to worry about. And I can see here that I have one of these hackle fibers also sticking out. Try to trim those things so they don't get in the way when I put on the wing. Okay, once you've got this all cleaned up and you're satisfied, well, still a piece of red seal fur. I'll trim that at the end. Okay, the next thing and the last thing to do on this fly is to put on a wing. And the wing comes from a tail flank, which has very nice strong markings. Now, I don't see any reason why one couldn't use mallard flank here, which is available both natural and dyed. The only difference that I see with mallard is that the markings are not as strong, so the contrast is not this is very strong black and white, whereas mallard is a bit more muted. So if you're aiming for a little bit more muted effect, I would be perfectly happy to go with mallard. It's also, I find mallard fibers, when you take a flank feather, they tend to be a little easier to handle. So what I do is I pull off a section of fibers from the feather, and then I just pull them off the stem. And then I take this section, you can see it's about this width that I pulled, which is just a little more than the gap of the hook. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to take this section and try to fold it in two. Okay, and I keep saying I'm trying to, because this is not an easy thing to do, and sometimes it comes out nicer and sometimes not so nice. So I'm starting to fold the tips and then go towards the base of this section, and I end up with a bunch of fibers like this. If I turn it around, it looks like this. So I want to have a little bit of a curve here over the top of the hook. And then I measure to about the point where this is reaching halfway along the tail. So I don't want it all the way to the tip of the tails, but a little shorter. And move it to my left hand and try to pinch now. So pinch the thread between, whoops, I don't like what I see. My finger is a little rough, so let's try something a little different. So place it again here. I try to smooth the skin on my fingers, but it's still rough. This is the combined effect of hand washing and disinfectant and whatnot. It just does a number on your fingers. Okay, so the other way to try to do this is have the thread exposed and control it while you're wrapping. So hold very tightly on the fibers in your left hand and to keep it in place. And there is the wing. Okay, good enough for my purposes here. Trim the leftover and then go back and clean up the head. Okay. Yeah, this looks fine. I might have to still pull out a few fibers of the seal at the very end, but that's fine. Okay, so now end with a couple of whip finishes. Working my way from the head of the fly towards the back, so from the eye of the hook up. 1 and 2. And this is the point where you get carried away, you cut the thread, and then it just spins out of control. So take the little plastic thing, cap the tube, cut the thread, and then the bobbin is good to tie the next fly. Okay. And then after I tied a little batch of these flies, then I go and I put head cement on all of them at the same time. So I don't muck around with the head cement with each fly I'm tying. And that's it. And you can tie this much neater and prettier, I guess, with enough practice. And once I get that, I still haven't gotten I didn't go to the art shop to get the feather treatment, but I'm hoping that once I get that, I can control those wings better. As I said, the fibers on this I find to be a lot finer, and they're a lot more slippery than mallard in handling. I can fold mallard wings quite easily. Teal is still a bit of a challenge. Okay, so that's the fly.
Nice ties, Florin.
Yep, good one. Thanks.
That's a nice.
Thank you.
fly.
Very nice.
Thank you, Florin.
So that's going to lead us into next week, which is going to be, because it is the season for salmon fly to start making their way out to the sea. We're going to tie a couple of salmon flies. I talked to Barry Stokes, and he's given me some information to tie a chum fry fly. So I'll have a go at that in the next day or so, and then post the information. It'll be using mallard flank, similar silver body with an oval rib, a little bit of marabou red throat, underwing of polar bear, overwing of mallard flank, and a little bit of topping with peacock herl. It will tie a thicker head and probably put some little stick-on eyes on it, and then use some UV set epoxy on the head. And then Florin's going to look at some patterns that Ron Este had forwarded to consider, and decide what he would like to have a go at that. Maybe
Yeah,
a chum baby or something.
I pretty much decided. So those Alvin patterns, like one of them is, like I said, it's what I did today, minus the wing and the hackle, really.
Yeah, very simple.
Sorry, minus the hackle and the tail. So you do, again, key ingredient is the mylar tinsel, wire ribbing, and some orange. The right color is think salmon egg, that sort of orangey red, for some dubbing. And then the wing on top, from the patterns I've seen, mallard flank is going to do.
Yeah.
And then there is an even simpler pattern, which is just tinsel and the wing on top, which is in Art Lindgren's book, which is listed there as a fry pattern. And well, now the feather he recommends for that is a funny one. It's a breast feather from a hooded merganser.
Good luck with
I'm
that.
sorry, I don't have that, but you can buy mallard flank dyed in all the colors of the rainbow, including the brownish color that the hooded merganser has. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a picture of a hooded merganser, and then I'm going to cheat by using dyed mallard for the wing.
The mallard flank that I'm going to use will be an olive mallard flank, the dark olive.
Yeah.
Lauren, I'll tell you something funny. I had a hooded merganser stuffed, and my wife decided that it was dusty, so she took the vacuum to it.
Oh no.
And I came back, And my daughter told me that it was what she had done. And my wife says, well, the feathers are still in the vacuum. You can glue them back on. So on one side, it was a bit bare. She realized very quickly that the vacuum wasn't the right tool. So I probably have some hooded merganser flag someplace because I kept the feathers.
Very good thinking. You can tie the